Welcome to the Volusia County Council meeting. The meeting will begin in 2 minutes.
You didn't have to get all dressed up for us. Okay, it is 4 p.m. and we will call the August 30th special meeting to order. Since we have a big crowd here, I'll still run through what we'll have the pledge as normal. We'll have the presentation of the item, questions from the council, and then input from the public, and then debate and a vote. So if you would please stand with me. Carissa, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Robbins. Mr. Santiago.
Here.
Mr. Dempsey.
Here.
Mr. Johansson. Mr. Kent.
Here.
Mr. Reinhardt.
Here.
Mr. Brower.
Here. Okay. Item 1, Ordinance 2023-39, Section 114, Taxation, Article 7, Communication Services Tax. Adding a sunset provision. Russ Brown.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of council. I'm Russ Brown, Senior Assistant County Attorney. As directed by you at the August 15th council meeting, before you for your consideration is an amendment to the Communication Services Tax Ordinance, adding a sunset provision so that the tax is no longer levied after December 31st, 2023. I'm glad to answer any questions you have about the ordinance, and also Brian and Aaron here to answer any questions you have about the tax. With that, that's all I have.
I don't see any questions. So let's hear from you guys.
All right, Aaron Van Cleek, Deputy Finance Director. Just got about an hour and a half presentation for Mr. Santiago here. So I won't read through everything, obviously. You saw some of this already in the last meeting that we presented. I will say that the $3 million in annual revenue does equate, based on this year's taxable value, does equate to a millage rate of 0.2845. And that is for the unincorporated area of Volusia County, only the unincorporated area of Volusia County. Yeah, as you can see here, this gives you the taxable sales that this tax was charged on, the tax that was remitted by the dealers to the state, the administrative fee that the state retained, and this is for 21-22, and then the net tax that was paid to Volusia County for that year. You got the unincorporated population of 115,000, and then what the average annual communication service tax paid per resident equates to, just based on that simple math of dividing the population, or the tax paid by the population. You have the two different 5-year forecasts for the MSD fund. This shows you the MSD forecast as was recommended. We are at the rollback rate in current year. That was the tentative rate that was set. And we originally forecasted rollback for future years in this fund, with a slight issue as we got to the end of the forecast where we were using a little bit more fund balance than we would probably be comfortable with. And so we did a revised forecast without the communication tax, and that's what you see here. And we do have it as a flat rate in next year and the following years to keep that use of fund balance around the same amount that we had previously forecasted. Impacts of eliminating the communication tax: it will most likely require a flat millage rate next year, depending on the value growth. And we'll see when we get to next year what that looks like. We had previously forecasted the ability to go to rollback. We show you the rates there, what the rate difference is. And then we do have a slight increased use of one-time money with the elimination of this tax, and you see what that total is there in the forecast years. And then with that, we'll take any questions that you may have.
David Santiago.
I got more of a comment. When the comments and questions are done, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield questions.
Matt Reinhardt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How long has this been in effect, Aaron?
I will look that up and get it right back.
Okay. And you kind of, I'm sorry? Oh, and any, so you said the use of one-time money. Can you explain that?
So we have a reserve balance in the MSD fund, and you see it. So this is with the elimination of the communication service tax. We have in FY24, we would have a reserve balance of $38 million. That reserve balance falls each year down to $27 million by the end of the forecast. So that's your use of one-time money, because those reserves are one-time money. They're not replenished every year.
Okay.
And so that's where the use of one-time money comes in. What it kind of does there is it reduces our flexibility for the unincorporated area, where we could put more money towards local roads. That kind of reduces our flexibility with those reserves.
So that's in addition to what the gas tax would provide as well. So
Correct.
that you kind of combine the two, or?
We send about $5 million a year to the Transportation Trust for local road maintenance out of the MSD.
Okay.
And so we could increase that amount with reserves, at least for one-time projects.
So the reserves is really the one thing that's affected, not where we'd have to take from somewhere else.
Correct, but eventually those reserves run out.
Yeah.
So you can't have upside down expenditures versus revenues.
I gotcha.
So
Sure, I
eventually we
understand.
would have an issue.
Okay.
Mr. Reinhardt, it appears the ordinance enacting the tax was adopted in 2001. I don't know if it was levied before that through a different mechanism, but it's at least been in your code since 2001.
2001. Wow.
Yeah, and the
And
tax,
it's always been about
tax
that
started
amount?
in 2002.
I'm sorry to keep asking. It's always been about that amount, about the 3 million, about that same millage rate, or?
It's the same tax rate,
Same tax rate, I mean,
5.22%.
sorry.
The amount that actually gets remitted to us varies.
Could vary.
But in
Okay.
the past few years, it has been right around that $3 million number.
Percentage of the levy appears to have remained unchanged.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Johansson.
Thank you, Chairman. Aaron, I see on the 2023 budget and the 2023 estimate on, I think it's page 1-7, that we had revenues less expenditures at 2.9 million, and then the 23-24 budget has 1.155. So we aren't spending as much as we're getting. right? And we're increasing the reserves. So is this one of those cases where in the MSD fund, we have a GFOA guidance on how much reserves we ought to have and what percentage is that?
There's not specifically a guidance to the unincorporated area.
Right, it's overall guidance?
Overall guidance on reserves. You are correct. In the previous forecast that you see here, we were adding to the reserves in the tune of $1.1 million, and that's at the rollback rate.
Right.
So when you flip to the new forecast, you can see that we're no longer adding any money. We're actually using 1.9 million of one-time money.
And what's the percentage of overall reserves to our expenditures? I know it'll decrease yearly, but
While he does that math, I want to add to that GFOA
yeah,
reserve comment.
sure.
The general recommendation from the Government Finance Officers Association is 2 months in reserves.
Got it.
But that is, they state very clearly that that's a general recommendation. They recommend more if you're in a coastal community. They recommend less if you're a bigger government. So
Right.
we have factors that offset either direction as far as what is the recommended amount of reserves.
And refresh my memory, we may not, but what's our policy to you on how much to have in reserve?
The council direction policy for the emergency reserve is 10%.
10%. And what is it now? Oh, Aaron's still working it.
MSD is 10%.
For the emergency reserves, for the total reserves, it's going to be a significant number. Just working off of the emergency reserves, 3 million being 10%, 37 million would be over 100%.
Right. So
94.
So we have a lot of reserves, but you see where I'm kind of going with this? It seems like we have a lot of reserves based on GFOA and our reserve and what we think we should have, and we talk about digging into those reserves, but I also think that possibly it's way too high, and oh, by the way, it's going to be $1 million more next year if it goes as forecast. So we're either not using it well enough.
So a couple things have happened in recent years. One, under the growth and resource management line, you don't see it in this forecast, but if you would have gone to last year's forecast, we created what is called a building permits fund, and we moved all building permit activity into its own fund, including the revenue that used to be housed within the MSD. So that fund is now self-sufficient and funded off of the building permit revenue. In prior years before the boom in growth, there might have been a little bit of support from the MSD. I don't know exactly what that number is for you. And so any support that we were previously providing to the building permits is now being added, right? It's more revenue, less expenses. And then also too, with Amendment 10 and the shift to the sheriff's office, kind of shifted more of their budget towards county-wide function and less towards the unincorporated area. So you have a little bit of growth there as well.
Okay.
We did disclose this reserve balance in last year's budget process and this year's budget process, and talked about ways that we could spend that money. And again, I point out local roads, unincorporated area
You bet.
would be probably the number one choice.
Got it. I have one last question that I didn't think through it enough to answer it myself, but your calculator seems to be working great. By getting rid of this tax at the average of, I think we said $27 a year. Somebody told me that. I don't know if it's in the brief or not, but do we hurt the MSD less or more by getting rid of this and staying flat next year? In other words, is the average taxpayer going to be paying more than $27 or $30 a year to if we do this? I don't want to save them taxes and charge them more in a different way.
Obviously, the higher value the home,
Right.
the more tax that they would pay based off the millage rate. So if you have a valued home of $300,000, then you're probably going to be paying more than $27.15, which is the average of the communication tax. So it just depends on the value of the
But
home.
possibly the people with the most need will
Pay
pay
less.
less. Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to stay on the same thing. Apparently, everybody zeroed in on that, but just what you just said, this does reduce the millage rate only for unincorporated Volusia in this.
So the millage rate was already set at the rollback rate for current year.
Right.
What it does in next year's forecast is we're looking at potentially having to stay with a flat millage rate. If you look at the two forecasts, in this forecast that we originally presented in fiscal year 24-25, we were using $85,000 of one-time money. Now you flip to the non-communication tax forecast, and we're using $1.9 million of one-time money. So we're increasing our use of one-time money. We're going to draw down those reserves. Like you've seen, we have a large amount of reserves in the MSD. So we're going to draw down those reserves. Eventually, it'll get to the point where we can't draw down those reserves anymore, and we're either going to have to make substantial cuts, or we're going to have to make it up with property tax or other revenue sources, depending on what our options are.
Or cuts in spending. You've said a couple times, talking about one-time money, that it can't be replenished, but it came from somewhere. Was it just a transfer in, or was it because we didn't spend the whole budget? And with expected growth in the years ahead, is it not a reasonable expectation that that will climb on its own? Of course, the need to spend it also climbs when if we're growing, but
Right. So your expense growth, it doesn't always, your growth in expenses is not always equal to your growth in revenue or growth in values. So it just depends on where we're at when we get to that point. The money was created from savings in prior years, because that is how we build our reserves. It is off of prior year money.
right.
I'll add to that. Aaron had touched on it earlier, but I just want to link it to what you had asked. The reserves have grown somewhat significantly over the past few years as a result of the sheriff shifting his costs from unincorporated area services to general county-wide services. So the general fund has been absorbing more and more cost to the sheriff's office, while the municipal service district fund has been shedding expenses related to the sheriff's office, which has allowed big surpluses to add to the reserves.
Okay. So it didn't go away. It just got moved somewhere else. One last question for you. It looks like if we reduce this money, we got to pay for it somehow. It looks like, just looking through the numbers, that it's paid for through animal control. Is that where all the savings came from, or no?
Savings would be from any of the expenditure divisions that you have listed there. Even when the sheriff returns money at the end of the year, the MSD is given its portion of it.
I think you're asking, with this revenue cut, what expenditures were cut from this budget?
Yes.
Oh,
The answer is reserves.
yeah.
Just reserves.
Just reserves.
Thank you. Councilman Kent.
Thank you, Chairman. Gentlemen, I just wanted to make sure I heard correctly. Did I hear that reserves for the MSD were at 100%? 94%, close to 100%. So drawing that down, if we drew it down, what we're talking about, is that like we have 10 years worth to draw it down, would you say?
You have a substantial reserve, and making this change would lower the reserves, but it's not an impact that can't be adjusted for over a pretty substantial period of time compared to other changes.
Right. And looking at the amount of money and looking at for the past couple of years and looking at the amount of money that we're talking about getting rid of, approximately 10 years worth of reserves?
Each year, if you were to look at that forecast, each year the amount of reserves that was being used was growing. So it might not quite be 10 years. We don't forecast that long out, but maybe 8 years. It's close.
Okay, close to 10 years. That's all I needed to hear. Thank you very much.
Okay, Councilman Santiago.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, council members. Provided this passes today, I think it's going to be a great day for Volusia County. All right. From the moment I got up here and joined you all, it was clear that this group was looking to make government smaller, more efficient, and save taxpayers' costs. So this particular CST tax has been a target of mine, I guess I should say, from when I was in the legislature. Never been a fan of it. It was just created to allow local governments to tax the people in other ways that weren't quite the most transparent, right? So I'm hopeful that we pass it today. I'd like to, toward the end of this passes, encourage staff without objection to do a good, strong public information session on this, on what we've done here today for the citizens in the unincorporated area. And additionally, I'm not a big fan of resolutions and things like that, but I'd like to see if there's consideration for this council to adopt a resolution encouraging other elected bodies in Volusia County to consider this for their next upcoming next budget season. I know they've already done it, but encourage them so we could be the first county in the state of Florida to have a zero CST. So I just wanted to put that out there. Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we adopt ordinance 2023-39.
Motion to adopt by Santiago. Is there a second?
Second.
From Troy Kent. And comment, Don Dempsey.
Yeah, actually, I had a question for Brian. I'm sorry, I couldn't beat Dave to the buzzer here. But so this other, under expenditures, it says here, transfers to other funds. And last year, it was 2 years ago, 1.7 million. Last year, 1.4 million. And then you have it zeroed out thereafter. Where did those other funds, what were the transfers? Where did they go? You see that? It's like the fourth from the bottom.
Aaron's looking it up.
I'll look it up and verify it, but based off of my recollection, hello, it's stormwater assessment fees were booked into the MSD fund. Stormwater is also charged to the unincorporated area, only the unincorporated area. And the permits, stormwater fees were booked into this fund, and we transferred it to the stormwater fund. The difference between the budget and the estimate is we were originally budgeted to send that difference to the building permits fund, but the building permits fund was able to be self-sufficient, so we did not have to send that money. That's why you see the difference there.
Let me clarify what he's saying. We had found that revenue that should have been going in the stormwater fund was going in this fund, so we reimbursed the other fund.
Okay. And you have it zeroed out now for the future years, is that?
Yeah, it was a one-time transfer. That's not something that occurred every year. The only transfer that occurred on a recurring basis was that last line, the $5 million transfer for road maintenance.
I do have a comment, but you want me to go into
Go
it
ahead.
now or
Sure.
just?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, guys, I don't know if you received that email from Keith Chester, but and had a chance to read it, but I'll tell you what, it hit it right on the head. I'm not in favor of any taxes, obviously, but taxes are a necessary part of our society, so we have to get revenue from somewhere. And I've always been in favor of a flat tax. I don't like progressive taxes. I think they're unfair as a whole. I think it's kind of, well, I won't go there, but I've always been a big proponent of a flat tax. And this is a flat tax. It's a usage tax. And I'm a big, from prior discussions of the beaches and all that stuff, I've always been I've made my feelings known about how I believe that if you use it, you should pay a tax on it. People who aren't using it shouldn't have to pay. I'm in favor, if we're going to have to pay taxes and have a tax system, I'm in favor of keeping this and looking at other places to cut in the more progressive type of taxes, such as property taxes. I don't think necessarily we should be getting rid of this mechanism when it's fair. If you're using the communication system, then you should pay a tax. The wealthiest person or the poorest person, everybody's paying the same rate. It's not a progressive rate. So, and that's kind of where my thoughts are. We should keep this. We don't even know what the budget's going to be next year. We got Sunrail coming in. We got all the other costs with inflation and the retirement. So I'd like to keep this because I think it's a fair taxing system. And I couldn't have said it any better than Mr. Chester put in his email. And I would just parrot what he said because I really, as much as I don't like the tax, I think if we have to keep a tax, let's keep this type of tax where it's fair across the board and not progressive in nature, and look to other areas to cut taxes. So that's where I am.
Thank you. Councilman Santiago.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry.
And Don, I would agree with you. Philosophically, I think we're aligned, right? And ideally, if we could do that, I'd be saying, let's keep this and do something similar to what you said. The problem we have is that that's a statewide issue, right? It's regulated at a level that we can't do that, other than we control our millage, obviously, right? Which is capped by the legislature also. So the reality of that happening in our time frame up here, I'd bet that it will never happen when we're probably on this ground, right? So given the current circumstances we're in, we have small tools that we can use to try to give some relief in taxes. And it's already been identified that we have a lot of money in reserves here. We have an opportunity to get rid of a tax. And I think this council has talked about other opportunities with the business tax receipts. I think Danny had pushed for something like that. We got to find relief where we can, but the ideal system is yours, what you said, and I agree. But I don't want to not do something with hopes of something that will probably never happen in our lifetime because of the system.
I have an answer to the transfer. That transfer that we described is actually 2 years ago. This transfer was for tree mitigation fund monies. So there is a tree mitigation ordinance where, in lieu of doing whatever the building planning ordinance requires you to do, you can pay money instead. There was built up money related to that tree mitigation that we transferred into a separate fund so that we could track it, because that is more restrictive than the general purpose of the MSD. So we transferred the tree money out into a tree mitigation fund so it could be accurately, separately tracked.
Thank you. Councilman Kent.
Thank you, Chairman. Just briefly to touch on a few things that I've heard, and I'll tell Mr. Chester, I apologize. I have not read your email yet, and I'm a little bit bummed about that, because even though I don't know you on a personal level, I met you here at our very first council meeting. I'm a fan of the way you think for the most part. So I look forward to reading that later. And to Councilman Dempsey, I'm a huge advocate and fan for the fair tax. Neil Bortz and John Linder, listen, hook, line, and sinker. I did what the last chapter said. I bought 10 books and gave it to 10 people I thought I could change their mind with it. I'm a huge advocate for it. And when I hear things like that from fellow council members, it gets me excited about some changes we could make along the way. But when we have 100% in reserves, there's nothing that says we can't come and revisit this if we have to down the road. But I don't think we ever will. But when we have 100% in reserves, when there's a day that we, or but we collectively can give tax relief to our residents, it's a good day for Volusia County. And I'm excited about that. Thank you, Councilman Santiago, for bringing this up. You know, you talked about how it was a thorn in your side when you served in the state legislature, and you're in a position to make change locally right here. And you're right. I think we can be the leader in this and have others hopefully follow our lead and give our residents, our constituents, our bosses some relief. So I'll be supporting this today for those reasons. Thanks for bringing this up.
Thank you. I just wanted to touch on what you said as well. I did read Keith's letter. As always, it was really good, and it made me think. It almost changed my mind, but it gave me some concrete things to consider. The way I'm coming down is that it's so hard to cut taxes, and any opportunity we can take, I think that we should take. This one. It's not huge, but we have to start. I think that we need to spend a lot more time looking at expenses in property taxes so that we can reduce that, because it is an unfair taxing system the way it's grown. So I don't see anybody else that cares to speak, but we have Keith Chester. You get to hear his letter anyway, Mr. Kent.
Well, not. Mr. Johansson had mentioned and that
if this tax was done away with and it transfers to property tax, that those that are the least among us would be the most benefited. And that's not really true. It's the young working class that would be hurt the worst, because especially those just buying houses, those are the ones that are going to be impacted the most with higher property taxes if this switches over to property taxes as opposed to a straight fee. So I think what is very important is that y'all first determine what your core responsibilities are as a county government. That's the first thing you need to do. The second thing you need to do is a needs assessment. You figure out what your core responsibilities are, and y'all list those. And then from there, you say, these are our core responsibilities, but where are we failing with those core responsibilities? Do we need more parks? Are our roads failing? Do we have litter in our waterways? What do we need to do? That's the next thing you need to do. From there, you need to figure out what the cost is going to be for those needs. And then from there, you need to figure out how you're going to pay for them. And then from there, you start discussing how you're going to cut taxes or assess taxes. This is very premature, the way y'all are doing this. And I am for cutting taxes. But this really is a backwards way of doing things. Y'all haven't even determined what your core needs are or how you're going to fund them. That's got to be done first. I'm sure this will probably pass today, and that's okay. But it's time for y'all to do the hard work. This isn't the hard work. This is the easy work, where y'all get good recognition from the public because you can say you cut taxes. You need to do the hard work and figure out what our true needs are and what our core responsibilities are. And then from there, you need to start cutting waste. We just went over this housing project program and the waste that's there. Well, this Transform 386 that's just coming up has $200 million for housing. And it's only going to go to a select group of people. We need to do what's good for the masses. We need to create a stormwater system that's good for the masses. We need to buy the houses that are flooding so it creates a place for stormwater to go. Let's quit wasting money. Let's figure out our core values, our core responsibilities, and let's quit wasting money. When a government does what it's supposed to do well, the entire community thrives. Everybody. Those on the bottom are able to be lifted up. Let's start doing the hard work and quit finding the easy ways out to get recognition. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, if we vote for this, it adds a sunset provision. What is the date for that?
The sunset provision is effective December 31st, 2023, so it's no longer levied on January 1st.
Okay. Okay. I don't see any other questions or remarks, so I'll call, I'll ask Carissa to call the roll. A vote for ordinance 2023-39, section 114, eliminates this tax next year. Carissa?
Mr. Robbins. Mr. Santiago.
Yes.
Mr. Dempsey. Mr. Johansson. Mr. Kent.
Yes.
Mr. Reinhardt.
Yes.
Mr. Brower.
Yes. So the ordinance passes 6-1. And the citizens of Volusia get a little tax break. More to come. And with that, there's no other business or comments. A couple pages. Okay. Then we will adjourn at 4:33. Thank you, staff. Well done.